Hi, and welcome to the Revive, Thrive, and Optimize podcast. I'm Billy Weiss, compounding pharmacist and health and wellness expert. As always, I'm very glad that you're here, and I'm glad that Janet, my co-host, is here, and producer Mike is behind the scenes. Good morning.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. And I just want to say that as we're doing these podcasts, if you have a question about any topic, anything you can think of you want to learn about, please comment or shoot us an email, and we will add it to the show.
Yep.
And today I have a topic that is very serious and has touched almost every family that we know. And I think it was also a big reason that you started your program. And the topic I would like to discuss this morning is cancer.
Yeah, definitely one of the driving factors in why I do what I do today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when I was in pharmacy school, my last year of pharmacy school, my grandmother, who I call Granny, called me on a regular basis. She called me every week. So it was the same phone call that I got every week, checking in on me. How's school going? Are you eating? Are you sleeping? You know.
I bet she made you some good cakes and pies in the day.
She made a lot of good food for us, yes, for sure. But she called, and it was a normal routine call until she said, I've got something I've got to tell you, Billy Ray. And I said, sure, what is it, Granny? And she said, I've been diagnosed with cancer. And I go to an oncologist. I don't know, it was a week or two later. You know, you had an appointment. And so I'm sitting in Chapel Hill, 3 hours away from her, and I'm crying. Tears are running down my eyes. And I said, what can I do to help? And, of course, she said nothing. And I got to thinking, heck, I'm at the number one pharmacy school in America getting ready to graduate. I'm going to come take you to that appointment because I'll be able to help.
Yeah.
That was my thought process.
That was your goal, yeah.
Yeah. So I come, my wife, it was not my wife at the time, but my fiance at the time, Beth and I, she's getting ready to graduate pharmacy school also in Chapel Hill. We drive, we pick Granny up, we take her to the doctor's appointment. The oncologist looks at her and says, you have this kind of cancer, you need these kind of treatments, you need to start now. It's fast growing. And I just looked at him and I said, what else can we do, Mr. Oncologist, to help Granny have a better outcome?
And about how old was she?
I'd have to look back, but 60s. Yeah, 60s. She was in her 60s.
So my age.
Yeah, she was not very old, and she was very, very active for her age. Worked really hard, liked to work, liked to cook, liked to clean. She liked to do those things for people.
So she had a pretty healthy lifestyle.
Oh, she was very active, and I don't know, food-wise and all, probably not really, really healthy, but she certainly wasn't obese or any of those kind of things, But she did, he looked at me right in the eye and he said, absolutely nothing. And I was just taken back by that he wouldn't know of anything outside of chemo and radiation. Nothing about food, nothing about water, nothing about supplements, nothing about sleep, nothing about exercise, nothing about sunshine, nothing. And so we take Granny back home and we're driving back to Chapel Hill those 3 hours to pharmacy school. And I was like, I just looked over at Beth and I was like, what are we really doing in pharmacy school? Like, we're not learning anything about health. We're just learning about drugs. And I was thinking the doctor was in the same boat, right? He hadn't learned anything about how to prevent or help the body treat cancer.
Or getting to the source of it.
Or getting to what caused Granny's cancer. He just knew drugs, right?
Which is great.
Treatments, chemo and radiation. And so what happened, long story short, is Granny took his advice. We didn't do anything else different. She was quickly bedridden. She was quickly changing diapers. We were changing her diaper. As a matter of fact, when Beth and I graduated pharmacy school, we just moved in. We got married and we moved in with them because my grandfather just couldn't manage it anymore. She was not able to do for herself.
Was she on chemo at this point?
She was on chemo and radiation both. And it absolutely destroyed her. It took away her quality of life. What she had left, however much, it took it away. And it was very frustrating for her because she was always the doer for everybody else. And she didn't like being done for. Yeah. That was not her personality at all. And so it was very taxing on her mind to have us taking care of her.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah. And so she had always been the caretaker for everybody.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, one evening, I come in from work and she was really out of it. And so I called the doctor and he said, get her to the hospital if you can. If not, call the ambulance. I said, no, I can load her up and get her there. We go in, he examines her, and in all honesty, he was very honest about it. He said we were very aggressive with her treatments, and her kidneys and liver are shutting down, and she has multiple organ failure, and she's not going to make it.
Wow.
Tonight's it.
Wow.
Call the family in.
Wow.
And so we did. We immediately let everybody know. We sat and sang and prayed with her, and she passed away just a few hours later, just as he predicted.
Sorry.
And so it was just a wake-up call to me then that I had to do something different than what I'd learned in pharmacy school.
I'm sure you felt helpless in a way.
Absolutely helpless. And so that's what led me to start investigating wellness or metabolic medicine, or, the kind of things where you would look at food and supplements and exercise and sleep and sun. And so that's what led me to go into my A4M program.
And that was 30 years ago?
Well, it was 25 or so years ago.
Yeah. You're not as old as me.
Now actually, Janet, I guess it has been about 30 years now that you say that.
Yeah.
It is closer to 30 plus. God, that's crazy how fast time goes. But that's what led me to get the advanced fellowship in metabolic nutritional medicine, what led me to go through all the WorldLink hormone training, what led me to continue to, get educated. I've been through a lot of different programs and learned from a lot of great people.
But you wanted to learn the source of maybe what was causing the cancer,
Absolutely.
Other things you could do besides
Absolutely.
medication, chemo, radiation, what would support her life or someone's life that is having to go through that. What are some of the things you learned or some of the things you still implement today?
Well, one of the things that I learned way back then that now makes so much more sense to me than it did then is that there was a Dr. Russell Blaylock. I believe he was an oncologist and a neurologist. And I think he's actually from Black Mountain, North Carolina originally. And so he was the cancer expert at the A4M and the guy who taught all about cancer in the cancer modules. And so I'll never forget when we were learning from him one time, he said, I'm going to give you the top 3 things to avoid to try to prevent cancer. And I had already, this was back in the day before computers, I was writing in a notebook.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Before computers, before,
before cell phones and all those things, or certainly before you typed on them, notes in them. So I was, I had already written down 1, 2, 3, and I had written on the top line sugar. Because we had gone through how sugar drives cancer. And actually I was wrong and I was taken back. I was shocked. Seed oils.
Seed oils.
So seed oils. So soybean oil, canola oil,
vegetable oil,
all the vegetable
oils. Yeah.
That was his number one thing to prevent and treat cancer, was to not use these seed oils. And the really shocking part of that is the American Heart, the American Medical, the American Diabetes, all the powers that be.
They were all saying,
they still,
oil,
to this day,
margarine.
say that. Yeah, still use these oils because they lower your cholesterol.
Wow.
So he talked about how these seed oils interfered with your metabolism and how they were very inflammatory. And then sugar was number 2. So, which makes sense because that destroys your metabolism also. But he never really went into deep detail of cancer being a metabolic disease. I was going to say, so that,
yeah,
I don't think we didn't really have the backing to say that, even though he was smart enough to maybe figure it out, but he didn't just come right out and say it. But since then, Dr. Thomas Seyfried, a professor at Boston College University, has come out and written books and has, I think, 150 or 160 peer-reviewed articles saying that cancer is a metabolic disease. So it just all goes back to the fact that the seed oils and the sugar make perfect sense when you look at all the research that Seyfried's uncovered in these past 30 years. that just matches up exactly with what Dr. Blaylock taught.
Driving the inflammation, driving the metabolic disease.
It's a mitochondrial disease. We don't have enough energy in the cells to take care of things. So the body is inflamed. The body has a lot of reactive oxygen species, or we'll call them oxidative
stress.
Yeah, stress on the body. And so the body can't do the autophagy and the cleanup things that it does when we sleep. Autophagy is like a cellular.
Autophagy.
Well, it's like a take the trash out. So we have rogue cells and bad cells, or bacterial cells, or viral cells, or whatever. The body, through autophagy, will kind of clean that up. Just think you got a trash truck going through and picking up all the junk and getting rid of it. And so when we don't have enough energy in our cells produced, we're not able to effectively take care of these things. We're not able to take care of the oxidative stress. We're not able to take care of the reactive oxygen species. We're not able to take care of the rogue cells, right?
And I guess the body's trying so hard to do that, then it can't fight disease or cancer.
Well, that's the thing. The body is very smart. Our body is very intelligent, and there's things that it will have to do that are more urgent, right? So if we have something more urgent, it will divert what little energy it has to try to take care of the processes that keep us alive. Like first, we got to breathe, the heart's got to beat, lungs. The brain's got to work. Yeah, so those things will get priority. And when we don't have the energy we need, and we don't have the nutrients that we need, and we don't have the water that we need, and we don't get the sleep that we need, and we don't get the sunshine that we need, and so forth, the hormones that we need, we actually create a deficit, and the body will defer to take care of what it has to. And sometimes, unfortunately, that leads to these rogue cells producing and dividing and then becoming a tumor or a cancer. And so really the definition of cancer is uncontrolled growth. Wow. It's a cell that was supposed to die, and it doesn't die, and it starts to divide. And now it's damaged. So we've always looked at cancer as a genetic disease because you have damaged cells, but it actually starts with metabolic disease, which leads to the genetic problem. And so
I guess we all have the potential, and we can turn it on or turn it off, and our lifestyle can help us one way or another.
We can certainly reduce our risk tremendously if we have good metabolism. Absolutely. Metabolic disease, which is rampant in America. We've hit on this, but we need to retouch it. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where Beth and I went to pharmacy school, says that 88% of Americans have metabolic disease. Now, there's some studies that show more than that. It's
almost everybody.
94% in one study.
And it's children now, too.
It's kids. Yeah. It's infants. It's not. It doesn't have to be, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old anymore. So, yeah, metabolic disease is driving these factors that lead to the formation of most of these cancers. So it is something that lifestyle can make a tremendous difference in, yes.
Now, when it comes to men and women, I think the number 2 cancer in both men and women is lung cancer.
Yeah, don't you find that ironic since we supposedly beat the
no more cigarettes
on smoking?
Yeah.
But lung cancer is still the second most diagnosed cancer in both men and women.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, because it's a metabolic disease, right? I mean, it's not a smoking. I mean, obviously now, smoking is not good for any of us and can lead to all kinds of cancers and diseases. But if smoking
you could get
were the
lung cancer
primary
and never
cause,
have smoked.
Oh, my father-in-law died of lung cancer and never smoked in his life. Yeah. So yes, you absolutely. There are many people getting lung cancer that don't smoke or haven't smoked. So yes, and that should be proof positive that it is not a genetic disease, but a metabolic driven process.
Your grandfather, my father, had lung disease, and they didn't realize it till it was too late, but he never smoked. So could it be things that we're growing up around, that we're breathing, chemicals in the air, things on farms?
Well, I'll tell you exactly what caused my father-in-law's lung cancer. Radon.
Oh, radon.
Which is a gas, and where we live here in North Carolina, there is a vein, they call it, of radon. And so he lived in a house that they had built, 30, 40 years before he was diagnosed with lung cancer.
Normally in the basement.
In the basement. It was a basement home. And so what happened, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, and I couldn't let it go. How does he get lung cancer?
When he hasn't smoked.
Again, a very active, in his 60s, I mean, like could work circles around you kind of guy.
And secondhand smoke, was he around second? Did
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, not that was brought up anyway. And neither of his parents smoked, so I don't think he
probably
would have
not.
been around it. No. But he was very active again in his 60s when he was diagnosed with lung cancer. And I asked the oncologist, now this is much later and I knew much more when this one happened. And I asked him, I said, what could have caused his lung cancer? And the answer blows me away. He told me, he said 99% of people that have the type of cancer that he has are smokers. And he literally told me this. He said, and the other 1% are liars.
Ugh.
And I was like, dude, if he tells you he hadn't smoked, I mean, I've known him, at that point for 30 something years. I'd never seen it, And so I couldn't accept that as the answer. And the doctors weren't willing to look outside of that. That's the way it was, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the diagnosis was horrendous, Janet. He was diagnosed it was late July or early August. And the doctor looked right at us and said, celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas now because he won't be here for it. I mean, that's where he was.
Mm-hmm.
And he had multiple softball-sized tumors in his lungs. And I'm like, he doesn't smoke. It doesn't make sense. He doesn't work in a nuclear plant. He doesn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He wasn't around anything that you would know of or think of that would cause this.
How did you figure out it was the radon?
Well, I'll tell you what, I started researching. I said, there's no way. I'm not accepting this answer. So I started looking, and guess what the second leading cause of lung cancer in America is outside of smoking? At the time, I'm assuming it's still the same, radon. And I said, well, what's radon? So I start researching what radon is. Radon's a gas. Then I find out we live in a vein of radon.
Can't see it, can't smell it.
Can't see it, can't smell it. So I found a radon expert, called the radon expert in. He comes in, he does his little deal at their house, and he says, yeah, their radon levels are, I think it was 26 or 27, and they should be like 2 to 4.
2, yeah.
Below a number he gave us.
Wow.
And so
really
he
high.
had lived in that for 30 plus years. And, that brings me to the question then of, okay, Beth's mom lived there too.
Yeah, I was getting ready to
She
say.
didn't have lung
She
cancer.
didn't get it.
She's still at 79, like one of the most active 79-year-old people you'll ever meet today. And so then you start looking and you go, okay, this is where genetics plays a role. Norman was genetically susceptible to radon.
Predisposition.
He was just he just was dealt that cards by his parents or grandparents. And so he had a gene that when exposed to radon long-term would turn on lung cancer. And so unfortunately, unknowingly, he exposed himself to radon all those years and it turned on the cancer gene. Whereas we're assuming now on some of this. This is deductions looking at all the research.
Sure.
Her mom does not have that gene. So the radon was not an issue for her. Now, we had it piped out. The guy, the expert, piped it out. Her numbers are normal now.
And you guys that live around here that have a basement, check your radon
So
levels.
I had him come to my house. I live in a basement house, as you know.
Yeah, me too.
Guess who else's radon was through the roof?
Yours.
Mine. So we had to have him pipe it out of our house, too.
There's some type of machine that you can have under your house that keeps
keeps
the air flowing.
Well, it's kind of like, I'll call it a vacuum system is what I'll call it. And it pulls the radon through the roof. He's got pipes in the roof that just suck it out the roof and keep the levels at acceptable levels.
Okay.
So the moral of this story, or the learning lesson of this story, is if you have a basement home especially, it can happen in a crawl space, but it's more likely in a basement where they dug deeper into the rock, into the ground. Make sure you have it tested for radon. Now, I think today to build or buy a new house, you have to have it done.
Right.
But back when our houses were built, I don't know that radon was even on the map of somebody, inspecting and stuff. So that's really important for people, is to make sure. I mean, we know some things we're exposed to, right? Like, say, if you work at a nuclear plant or you work at a place that makes lithium or something, you
or
know
asbestos,
you're exposed to it. Asbestos, yeah. So there are things, though, that the medical community just writes off. Well, he's either a smoker or a liar. Not, was he exposed to radon? Does he live in a basement house?
Wow. Hopefully that's changed. Wow.
I doubt it, Janet. I very seriously doubt it. I would be shocked if there's 5 oncologists in this area that have ever even heard of radon or care.
And that's 2 experiences right here where we had family members with lung cancer that had never smoked a cigarette or been around secondhand smoke.
So I think that we have to realize that I'm going to go back to the 5 pillars.
Okay.
That the food that we eat, the supplements that we do or don't take,
the water that
we do or don't drink,
the sleep,
the exercise that we do or don't get, and the sleep or rest and recovery that we don't do or don't do is what's driving the cancer rate.
So it might turn it on or off.
Absolutely. We turn those genes on or off. I tell everybody.
Lifestyle.
We have all been dealt a hand of genes from our families. We determine whether we turn those genes on or off. It drives me crazy when somebody says, oh, I have diabetes because my grandmother had diabetes. My mom had diabetes. That's nonsense, y'all. It really is. It is the choices that we make. It's the choices that we make.
It's lifestyle.
And so with lifestyle, we can drastically reduce our risk of cancer. Now, can we wipe it all out? No.
But we can take more responsibility, which goes back to you helping us be the CEO of our own health.
Exactly.
Whether we're at the grocery store or whether we're at the doctor's office, we can still be empowered.
Well, when we look at Seyfried's research, and I do believe he's the leading researcher in America today on cancer, he unequivocally wrote books and articles about this, that cancer is a metabolic disease, and we are in control of whether we have metabolic disease or not. That is where we are today, and that is what the research shows us, and that's what the leading guy in the world on research says.
Well, what about the number 1 cause of cancer in women is breast cancer?
Yeah.
The number 1 cancer in men is prostate cancer.
It is.
Why do you think that is? And tell us a little bit about those cancers.
Yeah, well, again, it goes back to metabolic
disease.
Somehow
I knew that.
Yeah. Well, the interesting point about that is that the breast tissue and the prostate tissue are very similar.
Oh, yeah.
They're very similar types of cells. So it kind of correlates that it's the number 1 cancer in men and the number 1 cancer in women. It kind of comes from the same type of tissues.
Okay.
Yeah, the same type of cells. So, but I think what's driving it again is all the insulin resistance. Okay. We talked about insulin being the most important blood marker you could ever have done. We talk about it a lot. Fasting insulin. We've talked about that many times. I think we need to know these numbers. And then you have these dramatic hormone imbalances, and people are scared. And we've done podcasts on bioidentical, compounded, micronized bioidentical hormones. You should not be scared of those when done properly. Reduce the risk of all female cancers, in women, and would reduce the risk of cancers in men. And so we have hormone imbalances, we have metabolic disease, we have stress, we have radiation from, all these EMFs or electronic magnetic fields from cell phones, from...
What about mammograms?
Okay, so mammograms, 50% of women that have a mammogram will have a false positive.
50%.
50% is what the latest study showed of people that have mammograms on a regular basis will have a false positive, which can lead to, breast removals, can lead to lumpectomies, can lead to chemo and radiation that is completely unnecessary in many cases. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a mammogram. I'm saying Beth has never had a mammogram. She's 57 years old. She will never have a mammogram.
And why is that?
Thermogram.
Because of the radiation?
Well, mammogram, number 1, I've never had one, but I am told it is not a pleasant experience.
No.
And yes, it is radiation, and you actually increase the risk of breast cancer with more and more mammograms. That's proven. Okay. And you have the risk of the of the wrong answer,
Yeah.
right?
And then 50% false positive.
A false
So
positive.
that's with a mammogram. And then you said thermogram. So let's explain to everyone, what is a thermogram? What's the difference?
Yeah, so thermogram is just a thermal imaging device. It is actually I'll call it a camera for lack
Shout out to Gaston Thermal Imaging.
Yes, she's awesome.
Lindsay,
yeah. Very, very intelligent, very good at what she does. That's where Beth goes. That's where I send everybody that asks.
Here we go.
So a thermogram is simply I'll call it a camera. I'm sure there's a technical term that takes pictures of the body and finds hot spots. So cancer would be a hot spot.
And they don't press your breasts.
No, you just stand there.
They don't even touch you.
You literally just stand there and turn when she tells you to turn. Yeah. And you can do not only the breast, but you can do the full body. So you can pick up things throughout the body that are potentially problematic and not just in the breast. So Beth has a full body thermogram yearly. The other thing is that a mammogram will not pick up cancers until 7 years. So they tell us early detection, right? Breast cancer,
I was going to say, so early detection.
But a mammogram is not specific enough. If you look at the way the cells divide for breast cancer, you would need 7 years before that tumor would ever show up.
So it's already been growing for 5 to 7 years before it shows up in your mammogram.
Whereas
what about thermogram?
Thermogram will show it almost immediately.
Okay, so
you get a much earlier diagnosis without the radiation, without the false positives, without the, pressing the breast in the machine.
Yeah.
So it makes, in my opinion, it makes much more sense to have thermograms. Now, I know this is going to shock everybody when I say this. Guess what's not going to pay for your thermogram? Insurance.
Why?
Again, if you're looking for the system to pay for your copay, to pay for your blood work, to pay for your hormones, to pay for your treatments, to pay for your test, you're going down the wrong road.
Now, one good thing about thermograms is in relation to some other tests, they're not that expensive. I think self-pay was
$150 maybe?
Well, I think it's around, for a woman, I think it's around $300 now.
Oh, okay.
But they did my entire body.
Full body.
And they did my breast.
Right.
And then you go back a few weeks later, or maybe it's a few months later, because they get a baseline.
Yeah, I think the
breast.
first one is 3 months. You go back in 3 months and get your baseline.
And then they do just the breast again. And that way they have a baseline. They can see if anything's changing. And that second visit is included with the, the same price. So
and men, the beauty of a thermogram is a man can do it too. Because men do get breast cancer, men get prostate cancer, obviously, men get lung cancer. So we're doing the whole body.
You can detect a carotid artery, many different things that can detect.
Thermogram is really a cool technology that I learned about 30 years ago, I guess, or so.
It's a cool technology, but it's detecting hot spots in your body where something might be changing or growing.
That's correct. Well, cancer will show up as a hot spot. So, when we talk about this, let's just think about it for a minute. The most common test done to see, let's say you find that lung tumor in my father-in-law or that cancer in my grandmother, that tumor. You're going to then have a PET scan in most cases. A PET scan is nothing more than a sugar injection that makes the cancer light up because the cancer loves the sugar. And then they image it and they see a hot spot. Well, thermogram can see those hot spots throughout the body. And then a person who is a radiologist who is trained in thermogram readings can read it and go, that's just inflammation. Maybe you lifted. I mean, like Beth, sometimes when she has had her thermogram, she may show hot spots like in her legs or in her back. And they'll be like, Lindsay's like, so you did CrossFit this morning? Yeah, I did a bunch of squats this morning. So the hot spot in her legs, then you go, oh, that makes sense. And the thermographer then reads it and goes, yeah, that's not a tumor.
And they give you a very thorough report.
They do. They give you a really nice written report, and she, of course, can go over it with people. So I think that's one tip for women is to look at thermograms. And they can probably find somewhere local, wherever you are located. There's probably a local person like Lindsay doing thermograms somewhere. One thing, Janet, I know we're out of time.
I was going to say, I think we're going to have to have.
We're going to need to come back and talk about strategies to prevent and make our risk of cancers much less, because one thing we didn't talk about is 1 in 3 women in their lifetime will be diagnosed with cancer, and it's closer to 1 in 2 now, according to what Seyfried's saying. The latest thing that I am confident in saying that it's at least 1 in 3 women. But again, I think we're approaching 1 in 2 women, and it's already 1 in 2 men.
1 in 2 men
will have cancer in their lifetime. So this is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's the number 2 killer in America. Over 600,000 people a year in America die from cancer. So we need strategies to reduce the risk.
And it's big business too, which is
It is big business.
Which is, let's do our next one on cancer and lifestyle part 2, and maybe go into some of the things that we can do for prevention, or when we get that diagnosis, what are some of the things we can do to help us along the way?
Well, the reason that this is so important and why we need to do a part 2 on prevention is because chemo and radiation, unfortunately, and again, I'm very sensitive to this subject, and I know people are, they are super, super ineffective. And they've been ineffective since they were introduced in the 1970s.
And super expensive.
Well, it is. Chemotherapy is extremely expensive. It's the biggest grossing product in America year after year. It's not oil or gas or whatever you think.
Wow, I did not know
chemotherapy.
that.
And, the success rates are very, very low for chemo and radiation, as unfortunately I have family members, and you do too, that found out. But I think the real tragedy is there's probably other ways that you can help your body fight, and you can minimize the side effects and things. And so we need to discuss that because the rates of return cancers after chemo and radiation are really high, either of the same cancer or of another cancer that was caused by your chemo or radiation.
Right.
So
I have a
we
friend
need to give our
through that
we need
now.
to give our bodies ways to try to correct and fight better.
And let me just tell everyone this too, that if they get a chance to take your annual class, which I'm begging you to do more than once a year, that you spend a lot of time on cancer.
We do.
That's one of the biggest topics, and we learned so much.
Yeah.
And it's truly life-changing, not just for the person sitting in the classroom, but to the ripple effect of their whole family.
Absolutely. And we can finish on this note.
Yeah.
If you don't believe cancer is a metabolic disease, please listen to this. Diabetics who have metabolic disease, that is what diabetes is by definition, a metabolic disease, they have a 50% greater risk of cancers. Now, why would that be if it wasn't a metabolic disease?
Has something to do
why
with
would we
insulin.
have all these lung cancer diagnoses when we don't smoke as much?
Metabolic
it has to
disease.
do with metabolic disease, insulin, sugar, so forth.
That's enough
Producing
to make me take my seed oils out of the cabinet.
no seed oils. No seed
No
oils.
seed oils.
Limit the sugars.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Let's do part 2.
Thank you.
Bye.
That was good.